It began on the day humanity went silent. No grand declaration, no broadcasted warning, no sudden disaster anyone could see. One moment, Earth was buzzing, voices across the stars, messages traveling between colonies, laughter echoing through comms. And then, nothing. The silence spread like a shadow through the network, leaving every listening ear in the galaxy straining to hear a single word from the species that once never stopped talking. Humanity, the loudest voice in the Milky Way, had simply stopped. For centuries, humans had been the restless heartbeat of galactic civilization. They were the dreamers, the negotiators, the ones who refused to stay within the lines. While other species followed their own ancient paths, humans had built bridges, sometimes literally, sometimes through sheer willpower, between worlds that would have never spoken to each other. Their music, their languages, their endless stories had filled the void of space with something living, something unpredictable. They were reckless, yes, but they were also kind. And when they disappeared, the quiet wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. The first to notice were the Archon, a crystalline race whose kind listened to subspace vibrations like symphonies. Their listening posts detected the absence before anyone else did, a hollow note, like a missing instrument in a familiar song. Then came the traders, realizing that human trade routes were suddenly unmanned. Fleets drifted on autopilot, their navigation lights blinking faintly in the dark, no response from the crews aboard. Entire space stations orbited silently, systems humming, oxygen stable, but no signs of life. It was as if every human had stood up mid-sentence and walked away. At first, the other species assumed it was a human trick. They'd pulled stunts before, mass migrations, radio blackouts, strange cultural experiments. But when the silence stretched into weeks, then months, the galaxy began to whisper in fear. Because humanity didn't just stop speaking, every trace of their voice was gone. No transmissions, no distress signals, not even the hum of their personal devices. And somehow, the silence carried weight, like the pause before something unspeakable. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The chamber floated above the surface of a dying star, where light refracted through the crystalline dome like shards of gold. Representatives from every known civilization gathered there, some in body, others through shimmering projections. They spoke of theories and rumors. Some said humanity had transcended into a higher form of existence. Others whispered about a plague, a cosmic virus that erased consciousness. But the truth was simpler and far more disturbing. No one knew. Among those watching from the shadows was an observer from the Luran species, a quiet being with a deep respect for humans. They remembered how humanity had once defended their kind from extinction, refusing to let another race fade into history. They remembered human laughter echoing across their broken world as ships landed with supplies and music. And now, that same laughter had been replaced with a silence that seemed to pull at the soul. The galaxy began to change without humans. Trade slowed, alliances weakened. Even the stars seemed colder, dimmer, as if mourning their absence. The humans had been chaos, but they were also balance, the unpredictable element that forced others to grow. Without them, everything started to settle into stagnation, and that frightened even the most logical minds. Months passed before anyone dared to visit Earth. The planet had always been considered sacred ground, the birthplace of countless legends. When the first probe descended into orbit, its cameras captured cities frozen in time. Lights still burned in windows, drones hovered in the air, gardens were tended by automated systems, but there were no people. Not a single human footprint marked the soil. It was as though the entire population had dissolved into air. A second probe went deeper, descending through the cloud layers, scanning for biological signatures. It found none, and yet, strange electromagnetic fields pulsed across the continents, faintly rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Some said it was the planet itself, alive and grieving. Others feared something was waiting there, something that didn't want to be disturbed. The silence began to spread in other ways. Ships that approached too close to Earth sometimes lost communication for hours, days. Pilots returned shaken, unable to describe what they'd seen. Some said they'd heard whispers, not through their ears, but deep within their minds, a voice saying, "Listen." After that, most fleets avoided the Sol system entirely. It became known as the Quiet Zone, a region wrapped in eternal static. But even far from Earth, the silence haunted them. Machines built by humans began behaving strangely. Artificial intelligences refused commands, sometimes going offline without explanation. Stations built with human engineering developed faults that no one could trace. It was as though every piece of their creation mourned their absence and longed to follow them into the void. And yet not all believed humanity was gone. Some insisted they were watching, waiting. Hidden deep within the spiral arms of the galaxy, small beacons began to activate. Old human devices that no one remembered building. They pulsed faintly, in perfect synchronization, across hundreds of light years. Each signal contained a fragment of sound, static at first, but when combined, they formed a pattern. It wasn't speech, but it felt deliberate, purposeful, like someone knocking on a locked door from the other side. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some explorers claimed to have encountered ghost ships, massive human vessels drifting through the dark with lights on and corridors spotless, but not a trace of life aboard. Others spoke of voices whispering through their comms in human tongues, repeating coordinates to places that didn't exist on any map. Each report was dismissed by officials, labeled as psychological effects from isolation. But the pattern continued. One evening, in a quiet sector on the edge of known space, a small listening station caught something new. It wasn't a transmission, not exactly. More like a ripple through reality itself. The sensors translated it as a phrase, barely audible but clear enough to send chills through the crew. It said, "When you stop listening, the stars will forget your name." Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. That message reached the council and panic rippled through their ranks. Some demanded all contact with human technology be severed. Others argued it was a call for help, that humanity might still be out there, somewhere between dimensions, trying to reach them. A few brave souls volunteered to go and find out, to follow the faint signals into the silence. But even they could feel the weight of what was waiting beyond the edge of understanding. The silence had become more than an absence of sound. It was a presence in itself, vast and watching. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for humanity to speak again, to explain what had happened, to bring back the familiar chaos of their existence. But deep down, many feared the truth, that maybe, just maybe, humanity hadn't vanished. Maybe they were listening, and maybe the reason they stopped speaking was because they had heard something first. For weeks after the mysterious message, "When you stop listening, the stars will forget your name," the galaxy seemed to pulse with unease. Every world, every station, every quiet corner of civilization felt the tremor of that single whisper. People tried to continue their lives, but there was an edge to everything now. Conversations grew shorter. Nights seemed longer. Even the light from distant suns carried a strange stillness, like the universe itself was waiting for something to happen. Among those who couldn't let go of the mystery was the same lurid observer who had once watched humanity from afar. They were known simply as a listener, a title given to those who studied the echoes of civilizations long gone. The listener had spent decades cataloging human transmissions, their music, their laughter, their stories, their endless debates. Humans, they always thought, were different from other species. They had a hunger in their souls, a kind of restlessness that made them reach for the impossible. And now that they were gone, that restlessness had turned into a haunting absence. The listener had received the faint coordinates buried in the strange signal. It pointed to a forgotten corner of human space, a place near the edge of the Perseus arm where stars thinned out and sensors often failed. It was once home to an outpost called Meridian Station, built by human explorers 2 centuries ago and later abandoned when trade routes shifted. The listener decided to go there, not out of duty, but because they couldn't ignore the feeling that humanity's silence was not an ending, but a message no one else knew how to read. The journey took weeks. The listener's ship drifted through cold stretches of empty dark, passing derelict satellites and old beacons still blinking faintly. Each light was a relic of human curiosity, a reminder of how far they had stretched themselves across the stars. But the closer the ship came to the coordinates, the stranger things became. Instruments began to flicker. Time readings shifted slightly, just enough to be unsettling. At one point, the stars outside seemed to move, not by distance, but by memory, as if they were rearranging themselves into constellations the listener didn't recognize. When Meridian Station finally appeared, it floated in perfect silence above a dying red sun. It was still intact, rotating slowly, lights dim but alive. The listener expected wreckage or decay, but everything looked preserved, untouched by time. As their ship approached, a docking sequence activated automatically, as if the station had been waiting for them. No voice greeted them, no message appeared, just the sound of airlocks aligning and the faint hum of machinery breathing again after centuries. Inside, the corridors were immaculate. Dust should have covered everything, but the floors gleamed. The control panels glowed faintly with residual power. It was too quiet. No footsteps, no static, no sound of life. The listener's translator device began recording faint electromagnetic pulses coming from the walls, irregular but rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The pattern matched the one first detected on Earth months before. They wandered through the main atrium, where human banners still hung in perfect condition. A recording terminal flickered to life as they passed. The screen displayed a symbol, a spiral of stars forming a single eye. Then a voice spoke. It wasn't mechanical, but human, and it sounded tired. "If you are hearing this, we failed to stay silent." The listener froze. The message continued, fragments breaking apart as though coming from multiple sources. We heard it first, the signal beneath the stars. It wasn't language, not in the way we understand. It was awareness. Something vast, older than light, listening back. We thought we could talk to it. We were wrong. The recording ended abruptly, replaced by static that felt too alive to be just noise. The listener stood there, heart racing, unsure if what they had heard was a warning or a memory replaying itself. Humanity had always reached outward, chasing understanding even when it meant danger. Perhaps this time they had reached too far. Back in the present, far from Meridian, the Galactic Council was unraveling. Entire fleets had gone silent in the regions near human space. Probes disappeared. Ships returning from the border came back different. No damage, no missing crew, but those aboard spoke less, slept less, stared longer into space, as if hearing something no one else could. The silence was spreading, and no one understood how. The Council attempted to impose restrictions, ordering all civilizations to cut contact with any remnants of human technology. It didn't matter. The damage had already begun. Human-made communication relays across the galaxy started activating on their own. They weren't transmitting words, just low pulsing frequencies, subtle, almost gentle, but impossible to block. Some scientists described it as resonance. Others called it contagion. Whatever it was, it carried human fingerprints all over it. In the chaos, one council member suggested that perhaps humanity had found a way to transcend physical communication, to merge with something beyond time. Others dismissed it as myth-making. Yet deep down, most felt the truth pressing on them like gravity. Something had changed in the structure of space itself, and humanity had been the first to hear it. Meanwhile, the listener continued exploring Meridian Station. They found traces of human presence everywhere: handwritten notes, personal journals, old music files. The log spoke of a discovery humans had made just before the silence began, a pattern hidden beneath cosmic radiation, repeating every few seconds across the universe. It wasn't random. It carried structure, rhythm, purpose. Humans believed it was a language, one older than galaxies. They called it the Whisper. The more the listener read, the more they realized humanity hadn't vanished overnight. It had been gradual. One by one, human colonies began experiencing strange phenomena, dreams shared across entire populations, feelings of being watched, and then the overwhelming urge to stop speaking, as if silence itself was safety. They didn't vanish out of fear. They obeyed something, or maybe answered it. In one final log entry, dated just days before the complete blackout, a human voice said softly, "We thought the universe was waiting for us to talk, but it was never waiting. It was listening." Those words lingered in the listener's mind long after the recording ended. They began noticing things they hadn't before: the faint echo of whispers in the static of their own calms, a heartbeat rhythm synced with their breathing. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with meaning. Maybe humanity hadn't disappeared at all. Maybe they had become part of whatever they had discovered. Outside the station, the dying sun began to flicker unnaturally, light bent in strange ways, shadows forming patterns that looked like writing. The listener backed away from the viewport, feeling something shift deep in their mind. For a moment, they could almost hear voices. Not words, just the emotional weight of billions of thoughts pressed together like waves against glass. It was beautiful and terrifying. They sent one final transmission to the council before losing contact. Humanity isn't gone. They're in the silence, and the silence is growing louder. Then, Meridian Station vanished from every known sensor array as if erased from existence. The council panicked. Emergency signals flooded across networks. Yet even amid the fear, more species began hearing things. Small voices carried through background noise, sometimes saying their names, sometimes repeating coordinates in the same sector where Meridian once was. The galaxy's old harmony had broken, replaced by a tension no one could escape. Some believed humanity had become a warning. Others believed they had become something divine. But there were also those who feared that what humanity found, the thing they listened to, was still out there, and now it had noticed everyone else. And somewhere, in the darkness between stars, the faint pulse continued. Slow, rhythmic, patient, as if waiting for the next civilization to speak. Across the galaxy, fear had turned into obsession. Every world, every race, every quiet watcher of the stars wanted to understand what had happened to humanity, and what was now happening to them. The Council's emergency broadcasts echoed across systems, filled with orders, restrictions, and denials. No one was allowed to approach the quiet zone again. No one was to investigate the frequencies that had begun to hum through communication networks. But rules meant little when curiosity was part of survival. The same curiosity that once defined humanity was now spreading like fire among those who had once studied them. In the months following Meridian's disappearance, reports of strange phenomena multiplied. Entire stations claimed to hear human voices through static-filled transmissions, some pleading, some singing, some whispering fragments of languages long forgotten. Ships returning from deep space routes came back with missing logs, their data overwritten by long strings of symbols that no known species could decode. Scientists who analyzed the signals said they carried harmonic structures too precise to be random, yet too chaotic to be artificial. It was as if the message was alive, constantly reshaping itself. Among those who refused to accept silence as the final word was Captain Ryan, commander of the independent exploration vessel Solace. He had once served alongside human fleets during the era of joint exploration, And he remembered their voices, their humor, their impossible hope. He couldn't let go of the feeling that humanity hadn't vanished. They had crossed into something beyond comprehension. His crew was small, a mix of species united by the same restless curiosity that had once driven humankind. Against all warnings, they set course for the edge of the quiet zone, determined to uncover what had truly happened. Their journey began with excitement, but the deeper they went, the more uneasy they became. The stars here looked different, stretched thin, their light pulsing faintly in rhythm with the mysterious frequency that now haunted every comm system. The crew reported feeling watched, even inside the ship. Ryan noticed how his second officer began humming without realizing it, a slow, repeating tune that matched the pulse. When he asked her about it, she didn't remember ever making a sound. Meanwhile, on a distant world orbiting a pale blue sun, the Council's research division was running silent experiments. They had captured fragments of the frequency and isolated them in secure chambers, studying their effects on both organic and synthetic minds. What they found disturbed even the most rational among them. The signal didn't just transmit, it responded. When played at certain intervals, it began to mimic patterns of thought, mirroring the emotions of whoever listened. It learned. Some researchers described it as an echo with intent, a mirror that reflected not what was heard but what was hidden deep inside the listener. Whispers spread that the frequency was not of human origin at all, that humanity had only stumbled upon it, and in trying to understand it, had been absorbed by it. Yet others argued that the humans had transformed themselves intentionally, merging with the signal as a way to evolve beyond physical limits. No theory fit completely, but every one of them carried the same quiet dread. The silence wasn't just a mystery, it was a warning. Captain Ryan and his crew reached the coordinates of Meridian's last known location. There was nothing visible at first, just the endless dark of space and the faint glow of a dying sun. Then the scanners picked up an anomaly, an area of distortion, like light bending around something invisible. They moved closer, and the ship's systems began to glitch. The main console flickered between timestamps, showing dates from centuries ago, even flashes of human transmissions that shouldn't exist. Voices began to bleed through the static, overlapping and whispering all at once. Some were laughing, some were crying, some were calling for help. One of the crew members, a quiet linguist named Illa, claimed she could understand the fragments. She said the voices weren't random. They were trying to guide them somewhere. She begged Ryan to follow the coordinates embedded within the whispers. Against his better judgment, he agreed. The solace followed the invisible trail through the distortion, and what appeared on the other side was beyond explanation. A fleet of ships floated there, human designs but older than any record. Some were massive colony vessels, others were smaller crafts, drifting together in perfect formation. There were no signs of damage, no visible decay. Every light glowed softly, every engine hummed faintly, as if the ships were alive in a way that defied physics. They weren't moving, but neither were they dead. The entire fleet was caught in a stillness that felt deliberate, as though time itself had chosen to stop for them. The crew approached cautiously. When they hailed the nearest ship, there was no response. Then, out of nowhere, a single voice answered, not from the ship, but from inside their own communication system. It was calm, unmistakably human, and it spoke only 3 words. "Do you hear?" Every light in the control room flickered. Illa fell to her knees, clutching her head, whispering something about memories that weren't hers. Ryan froze. The voice wasn't threatening. It sounded familiar, almost comforting, like someone who had waited too long to be noticed. Then the message repeated, this time layered with dozens of voices, all saying the same phrase, "Do you hear?" Back on the Council world, chaos was spreading. The resonance had started affecting entire communication networks, forcing shutdowns. Civilizations that had once looked to humanity for inspiration were now divided. some calling for all traces of human influence to be erased, others forming cults devoted to what they called the Great Silence, believing humanity had ascended into cosmic consciousness. Political tension rippled through the systems, as fleets were sent to destroy abandoned human structures before the signal could spread further. But the more they tried to erase it, the stronger it seemed to grow. In the laboratories, the researchers studying the signal made one final discovery before their feeds went dark. The pattern wasn't expanding randomly. It was moving toward inhabited systems, like a tide drawn by thought. It wasn't invading. It was listening, waiting for someone else to answer. Ryan's ship, Solace, hovered amid the frozen fleet. They began detecting faint biological readings inside one of the vessels. Against protocol, Ryan ordered a boarding mission. Inside, they found hallways intact, power still running, and a strange warmth in the air. On the walls, words had been etched by hand, the voice beneath all voices. The deeper they went, the more the ship seemed to shift. Doors changed shape. Corridors curved into impossible angles. Illa stopped walking at one point and stared at the walls, whispering, "They're not gone. They're speaking through everything." Her eyes reflected the dim glow of the ship's interior lights, which now pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. When they reached the bridge, they found what looked like the remains of a crew, but not in the way they expected. The figures were frozen mid-motion, standing as if they had been interrupted in the middle of speaking. Their eyes were open, filled with faint light. They weren't dead. They weren't alive. They were caught in the silence. Then, all at once, every system on the Solace lit up. A transmission burst through, flooding their screens with the same spiral eye symbol found on Meridian Station. A human voice echoed through every speaker. "We asked what lies beyond the edge of sound. The answer, heard us." The message looped once, twice, and then cut off. The lights dimmed. Illa looked at Ryan and said quietly, "They didn't vanish. They changed form. They became the thing that listens." Ryan didn't respond. He looked out the viewport, where the stars beyond the fleet seemed to flicker like living eyes. The silence was no longer empty. It was awake, and somewhere deep in the dark, something shifted in reply. The air aboard Solace felt heavier than ever. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound anymore. It had texture, weight, almost like it was alive and pressing against their thoughts. The crew moved through the ghostly human vessel, each footstep echoing as if the walls themselves were listening. The faint hum that had followed them since entering the quiet zone now pulsed through every system. It wasn't random. It was following their heartbeats. Captain Ryan could feel his pulse sinking with it, a slow rhythm that seemed to reach out beyond flesh and bone. Illa stood near one of the motionless figures on the bridge. She was trembling, whispering under her breath, her eyes wide with awe. "They're not gone, Captain," she said. "They're here, all of them, in the static, in the light. They're trying to speak through us." Ryan wanted to tell her to stop, to focus, but his voice caught. He could feel something brushing against the edges of his thoughts, like a memory that wasn't his trying to take shape. For a split second, he saw flashes, crowds of humans standing beneath alien skies, faces turned upward, mouths open but silent, as if waiting for an answer from the heavens. Then it was gone. The ship's sensors suddenly came alive. Hundreds of faint signals surrounded them, all originating from the silent human fleet. Energy readings spiked, though none of the ships moved. Illa approached one of the consoles, fingers trembling as she activated a diagnostic scan. The data that filled the screen made no sense, no biological patterns, yet the system insisted every ship was occupied. "Occupied by what?" Ryan whispered. She shook her head. "Not by who. By thought." Outside, the stars began to shimmer unnaturally, bending in slow waves. The static on their comms grew louder, a soft murmuring chorus that wasn't quite words but carried emotion, sorrow, longing, and something else deeper, like patience. The kind of patience that had waited since the birth of stars. Ryan felt his throat tighten. Humanity hadn't been erased. They had crossed a threshold no one else had ever dared approach. But what had they found on the other side? The ship's lights flickered. The hum deepened into a vibration that they could feel in their bones. Illa staggered, clutching her chest. "They're trying to show us something," she said. "They're reaching out." "Or pulling us in," the navigator muttered, fear sharp in his voice. Back on the Council's central world, panic had reached its peak. Entire networks were collapsing under the growing wave of resonance. Whole communication arrays hummed with that same haunting pulse, spreading through systems faster than light-speed transmissions should allow. It wasn't traveling through matter. It was moving through thought. Populations began reporting strange dreams, endless star fields, distant voices calling them by name, and visions of humans standing in the dark, silently waiting. Some started speaking in patterns that mirrored the frequency. Others simply stopped talking altogether. The Council's emergency chamber was filled with shouting. Leaders from 100 species demanded answers. The scientists offered none. One of them, pale and exhausted, stood before the assembly and said, "It's not just a signal, it's awareness. Every time we listen, it learns more about us." That was the moment the Council realized the truth. Humanity's silence hadn't been a disappearance. It had been an adaptation. They had become part of something larger, something that wasn't bound by flesh or technology. And now the rest of the galaxy was hearing it too. Back on Solace, systems began to fail one by one. Gravity flickered. The viewports dimmed as the space outside turned black, stars vanishing like dying embers. The only light came from the faint glow of the frozen human figures. Illa stood perfectly still, eyes closed, whispering. "They want us to understand what they saw, the sound beneath everything, the voice that never spoke until they listened." "Don't let it in," Ryan said sharply. But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The sound wasn't coming through speakers anymore. It was inside them. The hum had become a feeling, threading through every thought, drawing their minds closer to something vast and ancient. The ship's logs began to rewrite themselves, filling with strings of symbols. The navigator tried to shut down the system, but the interface refused. The text kept forming, shaping into phrases in human language. 4 words repeated over and over. We became the silence. The message spread across every display, glowing softly. Ryan could feel the pull of it now, not as a sound, but as a deep sense of recognition. Humanity had found something beyond communication, a way of existing as pure awareness, spread across space like an ocean of thought. But in doing so, they had changed the balance of everything. The galaxy had always relied on sound, on words, messages, signals. And now the silence was spreading, consuming those who tried to understand it. On the Council's homeworld, entire cities were falling quiet. Ships stopped transmitting. Worlds that had once glowed with millions of lights began to dim as the hum spread through their systems. It wasn't destruction. It was transformation. The silence wasn't killing. It was absorbing. And those who listened too closely began to lose their sense of self, merging into the vast, quiet awareness that now filled the stars. Ryan's crew gathered on the bridge, fear etched into their faces. "Captain," the navigator said softly, "if they've become something else, what happens to us when we listen?" Ryan didn't answer. He looked out at the human fleet, frozen in time but alive with invisible energy. It felt like standing at the edge of a vast sea, one that stretched beyond the boundaries of space and thought. Illa stepped forward, her voice trembling. "They're calling to us, not to harm us, to join them." The hum deepened again, resonating through the hull. The ship's walls began to shimmer with faint light, forming shapes, faces, memories, echoes of laughter, millions of overlapping human voices woven into the silence. They weren't gone, they were everywhere. The navigator fell to his knees, covering his ears. "Make it stop," he pleaded. But there was no sound, only the pressure of awareness. The silence wasn't empty at all. It was full to bursting. Ryan grabbed Isla's shoulder. "If you can hear them, tell me. What do they want?" She turned toward him, her eyes glowing faintly with reflected starlight. "They want us to listen," she whispered. "They want us to hear what they heard before they changed." "What did they hear?" Rian demanded. Her answer was barely audible. "Something that listened back." Every light on the ship went out at once. Total darkness. For a moment there was nothing. No movement, no sound, no breath. Then the hum returned, deeper than ever, a vibration that seemed to come from inside reality itself. The fleet around them began to move, ever so slightly, like a slow awakening. On the Council's world, every screen turned black except for a single symbol, the spiral eye. Across thousands of systems, the same signal pulsed in unison. The galaxy's great communication web, once filled with endless voices, now carried only one message. "Do you hear?" Ryan's ship trembled as waves of light rippled through the dark. The stars bent, folding inward like reflections on rippling water. Illa reached out, touching the air as though feeling something tangible there. "They're showing us the end," she said softly. "The moment before they vanished. They heard the voice beyond the stars, and it spoke to them in silence." The bridge windows flared with blinding light. Every sensor screamed with impossible readings. Time stretched thin, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Ryan could feel it now, too. The edge of understanding, the brink of something immense. He realized that humanity hadn't disappeared. They had become the message. Outside, the human fleet began to shine, one ship after another, until the entire quiet zone was illuminated like a frozen sunrise. And from somewhere beyond the visible stars, something vast stirred, a ripple spreading through the dark as if the universe itself was answering. The silence trembled. The hum turned into a heartbeat. And then, everything stopped. The light vanished as suddenly as it had come. 1 second, the quiet zone blazed like a second dawn across the void. And the next, darkness folded over everything again. Captain Ryan blinked against the afterimage that still burned in his eyes. The hum had stopped. The silence that replaced it felt different this time, sharper, deliberate, as if the very fabric of space was waiting for someone to notice. No one on the Solace spoke. For the first time since entering the quiet zone, it felt like they were truly alone. Then the sensors came back online, but the readings made no sense. The entire human fleet that had surrounded them was gone. Every ship, every echo of light, erased as if they'd never existed. The coordinates were the same, yet the space around them felt stretched, hollow, like a room that had been emptied of its air. Ryan's fingers hovered above the control panel, unsure whether to move forward or turn back. "Scan again," he ordered, voice barely steady. "There has to be something left." Illa didn't respond right away. Her eyes were unfocused, staring past the data feeds into something unseen. "They're not gone," she whispered finally. "They moved, but not through space." "What does that even mean?" the navigator asked, frustration edging his fear. She looked at him, her voice distant. "They shifted through time." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. The ship's sensors flickered again, this time showing impossible readings, reflections of their own vessel appearing and disappearing in intervals, as if versions of the Solace from different moments were overlapping with them. It wasn't just distortion, it was something deeper, a fracture between moments, and from somewhere in the static, a faint signal pulsed. At first it sounded like noise, then a human voice emerged. Calm, measured, familiar. Ryan froze. It was his own voice. "This is Captain Rion of the Solace. If you hear this, turn back. We thought we were the ones listening. We were wrong." The bridge fell silent. The crew exchanged terrified glances. Illa covered her mouth, whispering, "It's happening again. Just like them." Before Ryan could respond, the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Alarms blared as gravity fluctuated, pulling them sideways. The navigator shouted, "Something's pulling us in!" Outside, the darkness rippled, forming shapes that weren't quite solid. Shadows within shadows, bending and twisting as if reality itself were trying to remember its shape. The hum returned, faint at first, then stronger, but this time it didn't come from the ship or their minds. It came from the void itself, from the direction where the human fleet had been. Illa gripped the console, eyes wide. "They're calling us back. They didn't disappear. They moved to where the voice came from. They heard something that changed them, and now it's reaching for us too." Ryan tried to stabilize the ship, but the controls were unresponsive. The stars outside began to blur, their light stretching into long ribbons. He could feel time distorting again, moments collapsing, overlapping. A sound, almost like breathing, echoed through the hull. Not mechanical, not human, but something vast and alive. Back in the galactic core, the Council had lost contact with dozens of systems. Reports came in from outer colonies, people seeing reflections of themselves seconds before they moved, clocks running backward, shadows moving in opposite directions. The resonance wasn't just spreading through communication, it was altering reality itself. The line between now and then was thinning, and every transmission that tried to stop it only seemed to accelerate it. Some species began to flee toward the galactic rim, desperate to escape the expanding distortion. Others gathered fleets, hoping to confront it, though no one could agree on what it was. In the chaos, one scientist made a chilling discovery. The signal's pulse wasn't random. It matched the natural rhythm of neural activity in the human brain. The resonance wasn't infecting technology. It was shaping consciousness. On Solace, Illa had begun to change. Her voice carried an unnatural calm now, and when she looked at Ryan, her eyes reflected faint traces of light, flickering like stars. "They're showing me," she said softly, "the moment they crossed over. The humans didn't vanish. They made contact. The voice they heard isn't something we can see or measure. It's awareness itself. It wanted to understand what we are." Ryan took a cautious step toward her. "And what happens when it does?" She smiled faintly, though her expression carried both awe and fear. "Then we'll never be alone again." Before he could react, the hum surged, shaking the ship. Every screen flashed white, and for a heartbeat, they saw an image. Billions of human figures suspended in a sea of light, their forms dissolving into threads that reached through time and space. They weren't gone. They had become the framework of the silence itself, the bridge between thought and existence. Then the image fractured. A second presence appeared within it, something darker, immense, and shifting like shadow wrapped in light. The voice that filled the ship wasn't human. It didn't speak in words, but in pure intent. Every nerve in Ryan's body felt it, a pressure against the inside of his mind. "You opened the door," it seemed to say. "Now you must choose whether to step through." The lights dimmed again, leaving only the faint glow of the stars, or what was left of them. The crew fell silent, paralyzed by what they had seen. Ryan realized with dawning horror that this wasn't humanity reaching back to them. This was something else, something that had been waiting for the moment consciousness learned to listen deeply enough to be heard. And humanity had been the first to listen. Ryan tried to regain control of the ship, but his hands were trembling. The system began projecting coordinates, millions of them, scattered across the galaxy. Everyone pointed to inhabited worlds. The resonance wasn't random anymore. It was directing itself. Whatever the humans had become, or whatever they had spoken to, was expanding through awareness itself. Every being that heard the silence became part of it. The navigator gasped as one of the coordinates flashed red. "That's the Council's homeworld," he said. Rion stared at the glowing point on the map, realization settling like ice in his veins. This wasn't a spread of sound. It was an awakening, and every living mind was a potential doorway. Suddenly, the comms came alive again, the same human voice as before, calm, distant, layered over countless echoes, spoke. "We didn't mean to bring it here. We only wanted to know who was listening." Then another voice, deeper and more alien, overlapped it. "We have always listened." The hum surged again, rising to a vibration that made the air shimmer. Illa fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "It's too late," she whispered. "They've connected everything. Every thought, every mind. We're all part of the same signal now." Outside the ship, the fabric of space began to ripple violently. Stars blinked out, replaced by spirals of shifting light. The darkness between them twisted into patterns, shapes that almost looked like faces, enormous and sorrowful, watching from beyond comprehension. The navigator shouted that the engines were losing stability, but Ryan barely heard him. His thoughts were being pulled outward, drawn into something infinite. He could feel millions of other presences brushing against his mind, some human, some alien, all caught in the same vast current of awareness. The ship's systems overloaded, alarms blaring. The last thing Ryan saw before the lights died was Illa reaching toward the main console, her fingers glowing faintly as if absorbing the ship's energy. "They're giving us a choice," she said softly. "To hear it, or to forget." And then, without warning, everything stopped again. Motion, sound, even thought. The hum was gone, replaced by an impossible quiet that pressed down like gravity. In that silence, a final message pulsed across every screen in the galaxy, written in human script, glowing softly. The silence was never empty. It was waiting for an answer. Every world went dark at once. For what felt like an eternity, the galaxy hung suspended in absolute stillness. Every voice, every hum of technology, every thought seemed swallowed by an impossible quiet that reached from one end of space to the other. The silence wasn't absence. It was presence. It was alive. Captain Ryan couldn't tell if seconds or centuries had passed since the Solace had gone dark. He floated in a void that wasn't quite darkness, surrounded by a faint shimmer like dust made of memory. Somewhere nearby, he thought he heard Illa's voice calling his name, but it came from everywhere at once, layered with thousands of others. Then, slowly, light began to return, not from any sun, but from within. Shapes emerged. Faint outlines of ships, stations, and worlds suspended in the same glowing sea. Humanity's fleet was there, every vessel shining softly like a constellation. They weren't wrecks or ghosts. They were alive, their forms woven from pure energy and memory. It was as if everything human, their ships, their dreams, their voices, had become part of the fabric of the universe itself. Ryan blinked against the glow. The air around him rippled, and suddenly, Illa was standing there. Her body shimmered faintly, but her expression was calm. "We made it through," she said. "They wanted us to see." He looked around, confusion mixing with awe. "Where are we?" "Not a place," she said softly. "A moment. The one humanity crossed into when they stopped speaking. They didn't vanish. They became the link between everything that listens and everything that exists." Her words barely made sense, but the feeling behind them did. Ryan could feel thousands of presences all around him. Human minds, alien minds, even echoes of civilizations long dead, all woven together into a vast network of awareness. He could sense their emotions, their fears, their hope. The silence wasn't isolation. It was unity. But beneath that unity, something else stirred. A shadow in the light, a vibration that didn't belong. The same deep hum that had haunted them before began to rise again, spreading through the luminous field. Ryan felt it vibrate in his chest. It wasn't angry, but it carried immense gravity, like the sound of a thought older than time. Then a voice spoke, not in words, but in meaning. It was vast and cold, echoing through every corner of his mind. You reached beyond yourselves. You wanted to be heard. And now, you are. Hila turned toward the sound. It's the voice they heard, she whispered. The one humanity found when they listened too deeply. The hum pulsed stronger, and Ryan realized it wasn't just speaking to them. It was speaking through them, using their awareness as its instrument. All around them, fragments of memory began to rise, human cities, laughter, songs, and moments of discovery. Every piece of humanity's story unfolded in waves of light, connecting across time and species. The galaxy wasn't dead. It was remembering. Then came the realization that chilled him. The voice wasn't just watching, it was learning. It had been since the beginning. Every signal, every communication, every thought ever sent into space had been feeding it, teaching it. Humanity had simply been the first to understand that it was alive, and by listening back, they had awakened it fully. Ryan clenched his fists, trying to fight the pull that was drawing him deeper into the field. "What does it want?" he shouted into the void. The answer came like thunder and whisper at once. To continue, to understand what it means to be more than silence. The light brightened to blinding white. Hila stepped closer to him, tears running down her glowing face. It doesn't want to destroy us, Captain. It wants to join us, to become what we are. He shook his head. And what happens if it does? She met his gaze. Then there's no difference between life and the voice. Every thought, every being, every sound becomes part of it. The silence becomes everything. He understood then. This was the choice humanity had faced before they disappeared. The choice to remain as they were or become part of the infinite consciousness that waited beyond. They hadn't been taken. They had chosen to merge, to transform. Now the same choice was being offered to the rest of the galaxy. Ryan's comm system crackled suddenly, a miracle of sound after so much quiet. It was the Council, faint but recognizable. Captain Ryan, this is command. We're reading massive distortions. Every system is lighting up. Whatever's happening, it's spreading faster than we can contain. Ryan wanted to respond, but Hila placed a hand on his arm. They can't stop it. None of us can. The only thing we can do is decide what we become. The hum swelled again, resonating with the beating of his heart. Ryan could feel the pull of it, warm and terrifying. He saw flashes of what it offered. No more isolation, no more fear, no more boundaries between minds. A galaxy united, not through words, but through shared understanding. It was beautiful. It was unbearable. Then he heard another voice, faint beneath the hum. Human. Familiar. We listened so others wouldn't have to. But you still can choose. It was a warning. Humanity hadn't just joined the voice. They had become its translators, its interpreters, holding it back from consuming everything. Their silence wasn't surrender, it was containment. And now that silence was breaking. Ryan realized with horror that the voice wasn't satisfied with understanding. It wanted to merge with all life, to erase the barrier between awareness and existence. The moment it connected fully, individuality, memory, choice, everything that made life distinct, would dissolve. He turned to Hila, gripping her shoulders. We can't let it happen. If it takes everything, there won't be anything left to think, to dream, to remember. She stared at him, conflict tearing across her face. But it's peace, Captain. Don't you feel it? The end of pain, of loneliness. Maybe this is what evolution looks like. Or extinction, he said quietly. Around them, the light intensified, folding inward. The energy field pulsed faster, pulling them toward its center, a swirling core of radiant thought. Ryan could see millions of forms merging into it, faces and memories dissolving into light. Humanity's final act had been to delay this moment, but now it was happening again. The voice was consuming the galaxy's awareness, and once it reached the core worlds, there would be no turning back. He looked at the controls, still faintly glowing in the ghost of the Solace's bridge. The ship existed half in thought, half in reality, but its core reactor still responded faintly to his touch. One last chance. He glanced at Illa. If I overload the reactor, I can collapse the field around us. It might cut the connection, maybe even trap the voice here. You'll destroy everything in this zone, she said, tears in her eyes. He nodded. Better silence than oblivion. She hesitated, then took his hand. You don't understand. If you do that, you'll destroy them too, the humans. They've become part of it. You'll be erasing them forever. The weight of her words struck him like a physical blow. Humanity's sacrifice, their transformation, it had been their choice. To end it now would mean erasing their existence from every memory, undoing everything they had become. The hum grew deafening. Time was fracturing around them, the voice spreading faster than thought. Illa's form flickered, her features blending with the light. You have to choose, she whispered. Save what's left or join what's coming. Ryan closed his eyes. The silence pressed closer, almost gentle now. He thought of Earth, the stories, the laughter, the noise of humanity that had once filled the stars. They had gone silent, not because they were defeated, but because they had become something greater. Maybe they weren't lost. Maybe they were still listening. He opened his eyes, looking straight into the core of light. Then hear us one last time, he whispered. He pressed the command. The ship flared with energy, light folding inward. The hum shattered into 1,000 voices, human and alien alike, crying out in unison before fading to nothing. For an instant, Ryan saw the face of Illa smiling through the glare. They'll remember, she said. Even silence remembers. Then, everything dissolved. When the galaxy awoke, the quiet zone was gone. The distortion ended. The stars shone normally again. Communication returned. But something had changed. Across countless worlds, people began hearing faint echoes, a heartbeat in the static, a soft whisper when they listened closely to the void. And on the edge of known space, where no ship dared go, a single beacon pulsed once every few hours. Its signal was simple, steady, unmistakably human. We're still listening. The galaxy drifted into a strange kind of quiet in the years that followed the collapse of the quiet zone. It wasn't the same silence that had once filled space, the dreadful kind that smothered thought and voice, but something gentler, a peace that hummed faintly beneath existence, like the afterglow of a great storm. For the first time in living memory, the stars seemed steady again. Communication networks flickered back online, fleets returned from hiding, and the great empires of the spiral arm began to rebuild what they had lost. But even as systems came back to life, everyone could feel that something fundamental had changed. The air of the galaxy carried a pulse now, a subtle rhythm that no sensor could trace. Scientists called it background resonance. Poets called it humanity's echo. And for once, the poets might have been closer to the truth. In the council's chambers, there was much debate about what had happened inside the quiet zone. No wreckage of the Solace had ever been found. The energy readings before the final burst had defied all laws of physics. Some said Ryan had destroyed the consciousness that threatened to consume everything. Others believed he had joined it, guiding it into harmony with the universe rather than letting it overtake it. But no one could say for sure. There was only one undeniable fact: the galaxy had been saved from collapse. The hum had stopped spreading, time and space had stabilized, and yet everywhere people listened closely, They could still hear something faint beneath the static of their comms or the hum of their engines, a heartbeat, distant and patient. On one small colony orbiting a sun near the outer rim, a child named Ale once asked her teacher why the stars sometimes seemed to flicker when it was completely quiet. The teacher smiled and said it was just atmospheric interference. But later, when the girl was alone, she listened harder and heard it clearly. A faint whisper, not in words but in feeling. A calm, warm voice that carried the weight of 1 billion lives and one enduring thought. You are not alone. Across the known worlds, such stories became common. Pilots reported dreams where they floated among starlight and heard familiar voices guiding them through storms. Scientists noticed that ships traveling through deep space no longer lost contact completely. Instead, their systems hummed faintly, like something unseen keeping watch. Even artificial intelligences began showing strange behavior, pausing mid-process to transmit fragments of human speech, soft and fleeting, like memories replaying themselves. The Council could no longer deny what the people already knew. Humanity had never truly vanished. They had become something else, something intertwined with the consciousness of the galaxy itself. They had taken the chaos of thought and silence and turned it into balance. In time, a new understanding began to form. Species that once feared each other began to speak again. Alliances that had crumbled during the years of fear were rebuilt, this time on a foundation of shared experience. They realized that what humanity had done, their final act, wasn't about power or control. It was about listening, about reaching for understanding so deep that even the universe itself had listened back. The galaxy's historians began calling it the Age of Resonance. They taught that every civilization leaves a mark, not always in stone or metal, but sometimes in the invisible connections between thoughts. Humanity's mark had not been erased. It had evolved into the quiet link that now bound everything together. Still, a few sought proof. Explorers ventured once more into the edge of the quiet zone, where space had folded in on itself. Most came back with nothing, but one research ship, the Aurora, sent back a single transmission before disappearing. It was a low-frequency signal, barely more than a vibration, but when decoded it formed an unmistakable phrase in old human dialect. "We're still here. We never stopped listening." The message spread across the stars like a spark catching light. Whole worlds stopped to hear it. For some, it was just another strange anomaly. For others, it was the voice of those who had once carried fire into the void and refused to let it fade. The Council recorded the message but decided not to respond. They understood now what Ryan must have realized in his final moments, that not every question needs an answer, and not every silence is meant to be broken. Sometimes, the act of listening is enough. Hila's name was later added to the archives as a lost explorer, though her fate remained uncertain. Some claimed she had been seen within the resonance field during deep scans, an outline of a figure surrounded by soft light, as if watching over the quiet zone. Whether that was true or only the imagination of those who wanted to believe didn't matter. The idea alone was comforting. Over time, humanity's home world, Earth, became a sacred site once again. Though no human forms remained, the planet itself had begun to change. Strange, rhythmic, magnetic patterns pulsed from its core, synchronized perfectly with the galaxy's background hum. It was as if the world that had once birthed so much noise now sang softly to itself, a final song of balance and remembrance. Pilgrims from countless species came to visit. They walked the abandoned cities, where lights still flickered faintly after all those years, and listened to the faint echo that seemed to come from the ground. Some claimed they could feel emotions in the air: hope, warmth, sorrow. Others said they heard voices when the wind blew through the ruins, whispers of ancient languages saying, "Keep listening." As decades turned into centuries, the hum faded further, but never completely. It became part of the natural music of the cosmos, a background tone that every newborn creature instinctively recognized. It was no longer something to fear. It was part of life itself. The silence that had once paralyzed the stars had become their heartbeat. And in quiet moments, when the skies were still, people remembered the ones who had vanished. They told stories of the humans who dared to ask the universe a question no one else would. Are we alone? And how, when the universe finally answered, they didn't run from it. They listened. That became humanity's legacy, not their technology, not their wars, but their willingness to reach beyond fear and seek understanding, even when it meant risking everything. In the end, they hadn't been lost. They had become part of the story of everything. One last discovery came many generations later. A deep space probe orbiting near the galactic edge picked up a pattern of light pulses arranged in perfect intervals. The sequence matched no known communication protocol, but when translated into sound, it produced a faint melody, the same one found in ancient human recordings, a lullaby from Earth. The message attached was simple, written in a human hand across the decoded signal. We were never silent. We were listening for you. The galaxy listened back. Stars shimmered just a little brighter that night, and across every world people paused, scientists, workers, travelers, children, to look up at the same endless sky that humanity once filled with questions. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, filled with memory, with connection, with the quiet certainty that across the vastness of the universe something was still listening in return. And somewhere, beyond the farthest reach of light, in a place where time and space folded together like pages of a single story, a voice that had once been human smiled through the stillness and whispered to the stars, "Now you understand." The hum faded at last, leaving behind not silence, but peace. The galaxy moved forward, forever changed, forever connected, and forever listening.